Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show, the only prime-time television program explaining the East European geopolitical turmoil in English. I'm Andrei Kulikov, and what a panel I got for you to discuss the Normandy talks. So the guests of the studio today are Andreas Umland. He is the fellow of the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. Say something, Mr. Umland.
Thanks for having me, Andrei.
Yeah, good, because soon you will have to say something more expanded. Olena Snihyr, she is an expert of the National Institute for Strategic Studies.
Good evening, and thank you for invitation.
Andri Veselovsky, a Ukrainian diplomat and a deputy foreign minister in a very responsible time of 2005 to 8.
Good evening.
And Vitaliy Deynega, who is the founder of one very prominent Ukrainian charity foundation, Povernись Живим, or Come Back Alive.
Good evening.
Before we launch into a vox pop taken on the streets of Kyiv, I'd like to conduct an impromptu vox pop here in the studio. Please, within 30 seconds each, tell us about your expectations of the Normandy talks. The talks about the war in eastern Ukraine, that are scheduled for tomorrow. Who'd like to start? Vitaliy.
I don't think something very special will happen. I mean, President Zelensky has a pretty narrow space for maneuver, and I'm not sure that any option he has will be good enough for Putin, and that's actually not bad for Ukraine. I don't think Putin is weak enough to agree on something we can propose, so I think there will be no consequences. I mean, at least big strategical consequences of this meeting.
Taken into account. Andreas Umland.
I also don't expect much. Perhaps we can hope for some small steps that could, over a longer period, then lead at least to a freezing of the conflict in the eastern Ukraine.
Olena Snihyr.
I hope that our president will gain very important and valuable experience from these talks, because these negotiations are first in his political, his being a president, and I hope that I expect him to take the right decision. I don't know the consequences, the results of the summit, but this is very important for him to be very wise man, to be a wise man during these talks.
Thank you. And Andri Veselovsky.
It seems that nobody from Ukrainian delegation, except Andriy Yermak, knows what is the Russian diplomacy. It's a very tough and specific body or beast, and it will be very, very a learning experience for the whole Ukrainian team. They will see the Ruski Mir, Russian world, vis-a-vis alive and aggressive, and it will help them to stand firm on their positions.
Mr. Veselovsky, Andriy Yermak is obviously a well-known figure for you, but not for all our viewers.
Well, Andriy Yermak maybe is known to our viewers because he was the leading figure in the Ukraine Gate. So in this scandal, which involves Ukraine into deep American policy, which is a very strange and a very dangerous thing. So Andriy Yermak was that person who contacted with Rudy Giuliani, and that is why he is well known to Americans, at least.
So I have an impression that our experts are very cautious in their forecasts, which of course is not the case with common Kyivans whom we talk to on the streets of the Ukrainian capital. Let's hear what they have to say.
I think they won't be able to agree on anything, because Putin won't make any concessions. But I think he wants to return the Donbas. Obviously it's ours, but he wants to remove the so-called DPR and LPR troops from there, so that Ukraine has those territories and people gradually forget about the Crimea. We'll keep making concessions, we'll be buying gas which we're buying anyway. That's what I think. Zelensky will insist on what he announced. Concrete dates and numbers, but I don't think they'll be able to agree on anything in this format until there is a head-to-head meeting and talks.
As long as they don't capitulate again. That's all I hope for.
Do you think Zelensky will deliver on his promises?
I view him as a young boy.
Do you expect any progress in the Donbas?
He's not the person to do that. He won't stand up for Ukraine.
Great expectations. To be honest, I'm not interested in this. For me, it's interesting in the dimension that I can spend time with my father. Unfortunately, it's not something that interests me.
Does your father live in the Donbas?
No, I live with my father. He's interested in all this. He follows the news. I just sit there and nod. Yeah, Dad, you're right. Something like that.
I hope that his plan materializes. We are hopeful about positive solution. I'm not interested in politics at all.
Do you know about the summit on Monday?
I know of it, but I have no idea what will be discussed, what will happen. My opinion doesn't influence anything. Let politicians engage in politics.
I'm sorry, but I don't know much about the issue. I appreciate that as a Ukrainian citizen I should know more, and this format in particular, but I'm sorry.
There will be a summit of 4 leaders of Germany, France, Russia and Ukraine. One of Zelensky's promises was resolution of the situation in the Donbas.
This problem must be solved immediately. Whatever the format, I support Zelensky's position on the need to resolve this issue in a wider circle, involving the United States and the United Kingdom. I concur with his position because this issue is urgent. It's the #1 priority.
So, the resolution of the problem in Donbas, but what kind of resolution? I would like to hear our experts' opinion. What is acceptable and what is unacceptable for Ukraine at this moment in history? Let's start with Olena Snihyr.
Well, the red lines for these negotiations were outlined by the president and his team. By themselves and also by the Ukrainian society, and I would say that we all know about them. We can recall no amendments to the constitution of Ukraine, no negotiations with the terrorists, with so-called DNR and LNR, and we can continue. So. But what I have to say here that if we look at the list of these red lines, from the one side the society, the civil society, and the community of experts of Ukraine, and some political parties, and at the list of red lines which was announced by the president, they are very similar. They are almost all the same. So from this point of view, I have to say that our president can use it as a tool that can make him stronger during these negotiations.
What was the role of the National Institute of Strategic Studies in formulating these red lines?
The role was very similar to what I am doing here now. So we are the experts who present very careful, expertise actually, careful but still very solid position.
And it's up to the president to decide whether to take
it's up to the president, but we do not give him what maybe some people think that we give him or his team what they expect us to give him, like to please them. It's not the true. It's not true.
It's not easy to please the president,
of
at
course,
least the current one.
and we have for the profit or for Ukraine or for all of us, we have to give independent expertise. And sometimes we tell things which some people do not like. But it's like the diagnosis. If you go to the doctor, you would like to hear the truth and the right diagnosis. But
or
not,
you don't go to the doctor
or you don't go to the doctor and you go to some charlatan.
Or you don't go to anyone and try to heal themselves.
Yeah,
yes?
yeah, but it's not the way. You have to hear different point of views. And
let's hear a different
yes.
point of view. You mentioned civil society. Vitaliy Deynega here.
Actually, I'm not like, my view is not very different from Olena's, because actually I think that the lack of expertise was a problem of like previous government and this government, and I mean, like, Ukraine has not that much developed think tanks as Washington, for example. So the lack of expertise leads to some bad decisions which are very expensive to Ukraine. I support like everything she said, and I can add here that there are some another think tanks, like for example Nova Europa, and they made some good research on what can be red line and what can be not, like how they analyzed a lot of different conflicts and consequences of different types of this peace regulation things. And actually we tried, and I think we succeeded to also to give some part of this information to people who are already in Paris today, and we'll be talking there tomorrow.
Andri Veselovsky, the red line from a diplomatic point of view.
Well, again, let us not repeat what was repeated many times. Well, we heard these red lines today on the Maidan with a gathering of some 10 to 15,000 people. But 2 days ago, we heard these same red lines pronounced by President Zelensky at the talk show on Ukraine channel, TV channel, which was viewed by, say, as far as I know, by 4 million people. So it coincides. What is the problem? The problem of diplomacy is that the other side has their own red lines. And these red lines are very, very different and very, very far from ours. So the case is not to, the problem is not to create red lines, to write red lines and to pronounce them, but to find what can be done knowing others' red lines. I hope that Ukrainian diplomacy worked quite well in learning what the other side, what the Russian side is ready to really give to us. Where is the possibility of advancing, and where we have to stand firm and not...
Are they really willing to give anything? Maybe we should speak in the terms of taking it.
Well, you cannot take much if there is a, how to say, absolutely adamant position of your opponent. You have to bargain, and you have to explore the situation, which is different now when comparing to that which was 5 years ago. So we have a lot of pluses, a lot of positive signs or cases in the world developing even now, which may help to us to press the Russian side and then to push their red lines back. There are many cases. If we come to that, I will.
All right,
I will
Andreas Umland, what is the role of Euro-Atlantic cooperation in drawing red lines and probably shifting them? Is there any at all at this moment?
Well, I'm afraid rather not. I think that was Petro Poroshenko's policy for the last 5 years, and I think a fully legitimate policy to try to use as much as possible international organizations and international courts to achieve something, that started already in 2015, if not before, when there was the proposal to have a UN peacekeeping mission, the OSCE observation missions, the declarations of the Council of Europe, the OSCE and NATO parliamentary assemblies, and also some already decisions by international courts, but unfortunately that hasn't given that much so far and has not provided any progress so far. I don't want to compare it here too far, but I just want to recall the history of my home country, East Germany, where we had a totally different policy from the West German side towards East Germany during the first 20 years of the division of Germany, from 1949 till 1969, and during the second 20 years of division of East Germany. So we had a little bit, I would say, on a very abstract level, one could compare it a little bit to the current situation in Ukraine, that we had so far a hawkish line, as we had in the West, from West Germany till 1969, with the so-called Hallstein doctrine, when West Germany would not go for any negotiations. And then we had a dovish line from West Germany from 1969 to 89. And I still remember, I was already old enough, the triumph of the East German elite when Erich Honecker visited Bonn in 1987, and when a East German diplomat became the president of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Peter Florin, also in 1987. And this was just enormous for East Germany, because suddenly this pseudo-state was a fully accepted state and also fully accepted by West Germany. But three years later, the state didn't exist anymore. It was totally absent. Also with nothing left, basically, just the historical memory. So I think there is too much discussion, as I see it, in Ukraine about this hawkish or dovish approach. I think this is overvalued. There's a capitulation or treason or something like that. Yes, West Germany did at a certain point a sort of a capitulation. It abandoned its hawkish approach towards East Germany, and at the end, still West Germany won, because the game was a totally different one. It was not about diplomacy, geopolitics. It was about socio-economic development, and I think that is, I suspect this may also in Ukraine then at the end be the most important thing, and perhaps Poroshenko's most important legacy, so to say, will be in these terms that he acquired the visa-free arrangement with the Schengen area, because that is something that makes now the Ukrainian passport enormously attractive. And we had this bizarre case.
Doesn't it remind you of the visits of East Germans to West German and those 30 marks, I seem to remember? Which
there was welcome.
It's very interesting that the history of the so-called GDR, or the GDR, is currently very well remembered and quoted on many times. I recently was in Belarus, and a German researcher there also quoted the East German and West German reunification as something that Belarusians may learn from. Okay, let's see how it turns out. Do we have our Skype contact with France? Not yet, but don't switch off. We will probably have Natalka Humaniuk from Hromadske reporting for us right from the site of the future meeting. Meanwhile, for many people, the major red line is the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from some of the areas where they are stationed now. To understand it more fully, we must remember that 13,000 people were lost in this war in Ukraine, and many of them, of course, are Ukrainian soldiers who advanced to the territory, who liberated the territory from the occupiers, and now in some areas at least they have to withdraw. Yes, the opponents, the enemy has to withdraw also, but many people say that this is a sign of capitulation. One of the sites where the mutual withdrawal has to take place is Stanytsia Luhanska. We may show you the location on the map. Yes, you see the occupied areas of Donbas are in gray, and Stanytsia Luhanska is on the edge of the government-controlled and non-government-controlled area, almost next to the Russian border. We have had our correspondent Nastya Stanko in this city, and she talked to people who cross the border for different reasons in both directions. Let's see what she brought us.
Давайте построим мост и будем жить.
Согласен, да.
Правильно?
Мы же Украина, Луганск, правильно?
Мы же Украина.
The bridge at Stanytsia Luhanska was blown up by Russia-led separatists in March 2015. 10,000 Ukrainians would every day cross from one side of the Siversky Donets River to the other, sometimes climbing steep, homemade stairs. That was the situation until November the 20th, 2019.
This bridge, this is a very symbolic mission.
Дуже знакова місія, яка показує, що
It shows that we don't just want,
ми просто хочемо.
we're actually doing something.
The newly restored bridge at Stanytsia Luhanska has been in service for a week. Now we're waiting in the gray zone. This is where only representatives of the Joint Center of Control and Coordination, or JCCC, for ceasefires on the Ukrainian side are allowed to stand. The other side could have representatives from the Russian side, but they've not been here since 2017. And instead, an illegal armed formation stands there with the JCCC notation. That's illegal, just like the flags of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic on the bridge. After the restoration of the bridge crossers have increased by a few thousand people.
Yesterday we counted, for example, passenger flow of around 13,900. We are linking that with the fact that pensions are being paid these days. More than 80% of people that cross the demarcation line at this checkpoint are pensioners. They come, for example, to receive their pensions, to receive the so-called verification documents they need to receive from financial institutions to confirm their status.
The same people keep crossing, like pensioners, in order to be noted on government-controlled territory in Stanytsia, and once a month to receive their pensions. And so a few new ATMs are opening in Stanytsia each year.
Сколько это времени уходит на все?
Да, и день бывает такий же. По-разному ж.
Ага. Ну, тобто як? День на те, щоб перейти сюди?
Та за день не вспіваєш. Ночувати треба.
A bed to stay over starts at 100 hryvnia, but you can skip the lines. For that same 100 hryvnia, a taxi can drive you to a different ATM. It's a bit further, but there are no lines there.
Якщо все мирно стане, то де цей весь бізнес буде?
Оце вони тут будуть страдати, і дуже страдати без нас. Ми ж хотімо те саме, як ото кажуть, гроші робимо. Навіть кіоски закриваються.
They tried to withdraw troops 3 years ago in Stanytsia. Halina Barabashova was against the withdrawals then.
At the time, they were still shooting. Then there was an everyday threat of the possibility that someone could seize us. But now it's quiet. Practically no one shoots at us anymore. Of course, we don't feel safe completely, but soldiers are still here and police still patrol with automatic weapons.
A refugee from Luhansk and activist in Stanytsia Luhanska, Natalia Zhurbenko, is against the withdrawal of soldiers, both 3 years ago and now. She doesn't believe that the restoration of the bridge will lead to peace on both sides of the river.
They will still come for pensions, just faster now. What could have changed now, please tell me? Have the people over there changed? Did they get smarter, stop pursuing Russian passports, start rejecting them? They hate Ukraine openly here. Things got a lot worse and more dangerous.
On December the 9th, in Paris, the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France, and the German Chancellor will all meet in the Normandy format. We ask people who cross the bridge on a daily basis and those that live in Stanytsia what they expect from the meetings.
Хотел бы, чтобы мы были Украина. Очень хотел. Ну, что-то не верится, я, наверное, не дожил. Сильно он молодой, понимаете? Был бы он постарше, не так просто послать.
У нас же слухи тільки йдуть, що у маї все, вже закінчиться все.
Ну как, ну тут не было вот таких поездок, чтобы мы дома получили свою заработанную пенсию, и все.
Ну, я думаю,
I think that nothing will be decided, but at least I hope they won't give up on Ukrainian positions. That's what I'm fearing. They might say now, for example, that without handing over the borders to Ukraine, they will conduct elections. And what will these elections do? This would even make things worse for Stanytsia, because they'll choose their own people, and our own will be friends with them. So I don't think anything good will come of it. For us, it's even better if they freeze this conflict.
I have hope that this meeting will fail to happen in general. I don't trust Putin, and I have many reasons for that.
But for now, both sides are waiting on opposite sides of the Siversky Donets to see what agreements will emerge from Paris. Life here on the restored bridge continues on its path.
Що везете? Що тут, там дешевше, там дорожче?
Наше вкуснее. Это о чем-то говорит?
А так а что именно вкуснее?
У нас все вкуснее. Колбаса, сыр, все буквально вкусное.
Ну и дешевле, я так понимаю, да?
Да, несколько дешевле.
А там что дешевле?
Там хлеб, сигареты.
Скільки коштує хліб?
Половину дешевле, чем у нас.
Серьезно?
Что я буду говорить? Посчитайте 12 рублей хлеб в рублях.
Ви знаєте, що скоро зустріч в Парижі, там президентів, все. Ви
сподіваємось, ми
на що сподіваєтесь?
На об'єднання, на те, що Україна прийде туди, де вона має бути.
А ви зараз в Луганськ їдете?
Волчевськ.
Волчевськ?
So this is what people in Stanytsia Luhanska and those who come there to collect their pension from the occupied territory think. And two of our experts in the studio said they're not afraid. Yes, they're not afraid because they want Ukraine to be with them again. And many of people on the occupied territories want to be with Ukraine again. But not everybody, of course. And this is one of the questions and issues that puts to doubt a lot of intentions on the government-controlled areas. Anyway, we also heard that some people pin their hopes on the broader involvement of international negotiators, for instance, on the involvement of the United States and the United Kingdom, but I have a feeling that actually the solution may be in a different plane, throwing Russia out of the negotiation progress. At least everyone says there is no sense in talking to Russia because they disregard whatever they agree on. Andri Veselovsky, what's your take on this?
Well, in fact, Americans and British are already involved in the decision-making. Americans, through their legislation, recently Congress made the legislation banning some international companies from working with the Nord Stream pipeline too. American LNG is coming to Europe, thus preventing Russian gas to occupy European Union states. British ships are the most active ships in the Black Sea, and we know that Russian forces wanted to make Black Sea their internal lake or something. Americans are very supportive in helping our military men to get skills, etc. So they are here. One of the most pronouncing declaration was made by the Secretary Pompeo yesterday, supporting Ukraine, and the International Monetary Fund announced the future program of support to Ukraine, $4 billion, which is a lot for Ukrainian budget, and so it is the involvement of these big two countries.
Yes, but what's the sense of talking with Russia?
Well, we have to talk to Russia. Russia is our neighbor first. Russia is a big and a very highly militarized state. Second, Russia is in a place where a lot of energy resources and other mineral resources are located, and Russia is something which separates Europe from China, which is also a point.
So, and Ukraine is something that separates Europe from Russia.
Well, yes, and that is why we have, I guess, we have to repeat it. The West has to talk to Russia, Ukraine has to talk to Russia, but to show our arguments, not only our willingness to restore, to win, etc., etc. We have strong arguments, and these arguments should be repeated again and again. And
repeat one.
One?
Yes.
The strongest the strongest argument is the position of Ukrainian people. We've seen it on TV, we've seen it in the social media, we've seen it today at the meetings throughout the country. Ukrainians are involved that. They are not, they are taking care of that. Well, I guess that this is the clear demonstration of a spirit and historical decisiveness of these people not to give up and not to be Russians' puppets. And this is the strongest government.
Vitaliy Deynega, we've seen a person who lives in Stanytsia Luhanska and who says, let them freeze the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of this?
I think it's the most probable consequence of Normandy. I don't think that they will negotiate something and will really allow to deoccupy these territories. I mean, like Putin has to choose something between sanctions or like betraying Donbas from Russian point of view, and I'm not sure he's ready for the second part. So, I mean, the frozen conflict is very probable, and I think that Russia has a motivation to freeze it now, because if Russia freezes this conflict, sanctions would not be that hard, and Russia will have a chance in the next few years to get rid of part of sanctions at least. We've seen sanctions coming back without any steps from Russia, like European Council, for example. So I think that, I mean, like, and Zelensky says that if this meeting will not be successful, they will freeze conflict, build walls, stop paying pensions. I think that's very possible. And do I like it personally? There are several, like, ways to look at it, because, for example, we've been talking about Eastern Germany here, and even if you go now to Germany, you will see a big difference between Eastern Germany and Western Germany, even 30 years after the conflict. And I mean, like, we will have the same problem with Donbas. Even after election, if that will happen, even if it will happen as we want it, I mean, like, we will have a border control, and like, and this election would be like in few years after we have a border control, and after we have like a media expansion there, so they will hear a Ukrainian point of view. Even after that, those territories will be very problematic, and we will have a huge amount of problems and huge amount of spendings there. So I'm not sure, like, there are two ways. I mean, like, there is a price to deoccupy Donbas, and there is a price we pay every day for conflict. And I think the first price is still too big.
Thank you, Vitaliy Deynega. And we have Natalka Humnyuk from Hromadske on Skype. Hi, Natalia. You're on the bus. I presume that you're heading to the site of the tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah, good evening. Good to hear you. Yes, we just arrived to Paris and are traveling to the center of the city and awaiting for the meeting which will take tomorrow. However, I managed to communicate with a number of the French journalists and analysts already. So explain, maybe it's known what will happen, to manage to hear the French position on that. So we expect the meeting to start at 3 p.m. This Monday. It will start with Emmanuel Macron meeting President Zelensky for half an hour. Right after Emmanuel Macron will meet the Russian President President Putin. Right after, there would be the same kind of thing with Angela Merkel. She will meet Zelensky for half an hour and then Putin for half an hour. It's still not decided fully whether there will be the meeting regarding the Putin and Zelensky direct meeting. If it will take place, it will take before the working session, as people at the Elysee says, the working session, which is planned to start around like 4 p.m., will last as long as it needs. And the general idea of the session, that's how the Elysee puts it together, is the discussion on bringing back the sovereignty of the Ukrainian territory. Of course, there is an obvious question, like if this meeting is about sovereignty and Ukrainian territorial integrity, whether Crimea comes to the place. And the official answer from Paris is that they usually say, Crimea is annexed illegally, however, the Minsk is about Donbas and this meeting is about the Minsk. And more or less the whole idea is how Ukraine can regain the control over the border. Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron had met last week in Paris. They had a dinner together in order to have the discussion what they will do, and I know that there are a lot of concerns of that, but what I was assured by the French journalists and their sources in the Elysee Palace, they said that the Paris and Macron in particular is quite aware that there is a very difficult political context in Kyiv and in Ukraine, so they really need to show quite some prospects that the West is on the Ukrainian side. Of course, they also try not to raise expectations too high. Everybody really are very, very cautious about that. However, it's generally considered that the background and the context is quite good because there is some atmosphere of the trust and all the goodwills from the Ukrainian side are there. That is the breach in Stanytsia Luhanska. This is the prisoners exchange. So that's what and that's exactly the same things I expected from Russia. We understand that they might not happen. Of course, the big part of the discussion would be on the local elections in the occupied territories, including which may take place in next autumn. At least that was mentioned by the president and Andri Veselovsky, his advisor earlier. And it's clear that in Minsk, and the Paris understand that, at least I wasn't sure, that in Minsk the elections are taking place, first, and then the Russian troops are leaving the territory. But it's also believed that there is quite a legitimate question from the Ukrainian side to discuss that. So that's what we know so far. And I know the guest in the studio already probably discussed the other topics, but Hromadske team had managed to talk to many officials within the last week, and we understand that one of the priority is the ceasefire all along the contact line, and the second is a major prisoners exchange. The elections in the occupied territory is probably, they might happen together with the Ukrainian local elections, but the chances for that are not very high. However, what I was also ensured, there was, as you know, that Andri Veselovsky talked to been in London, speaking in Chatham House. Some people spent some considerable time with him, so they also ensure that the presidential team, the office of the president, sees this meeting not like the final meeting to sort out everything, but like a start of the process, which sounds logical.
Thank you very much, Natalia Humanyuk from Hromadske. She reported for us from Paris, and tomorrow she will provide a wealth of information on how the meeting goes. Meanwhile, my question is to Andreas Umland. We heard from Vitaliy Deynega his thoughts about elections. We heard from Natalia Humanyuk the two options, whether the elections will be held on the occupied territory or on the de-occupied territory. What does the international experience say?
Well, there is this idea to somehow conduct elections there while Russian troops are still there and the border is still open. I don't think that is actually possible because either the Ukrainian state would first have to return to these territories, the Ukrainian state institutions, the Central Electoral Commission, the Interior Ministry, the courts, and so on, but also the non-governmental organizations, the mass media, the political parties. This is not possible. The other sort of very hypothetical option is to have some sort of elections there while these DNR, LNR pseudo-republics are still existing there. Here, perhaps the model is again East Germany in March 1990 when we had elections to the Volkskammer, the People's Chamber, with the old regime still being there, with 500,000 Soviet citizens, 300,000 troops, and 200,000 civilians from the Soviet Union being still on East German territory. But the big difference in East Germany in March 1990 was, of course, that there was, before that, a Velvet Revolution in 1989 in East Germany, and that Moscow had changed its position from the Brezhnev doctrine to the so-called Sinatra doctrine, which is, you know, the sort of jokingly referring to the song of Frank Sinatra, I Do It My Way, and Gorbachev basically told the East European countries that they can do it their way.
Why don't we compare the situation to Eastern Slavonia, where the elections were held when the region was still not under Croatian control?
But there was the peacekeeping mission there.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that would be another. That would be actually the third option, but we are still far away, and that's also very expensive. I have with a friend, Alexei Melnik from the Razumkov Center. We have calculated that there would have to be at least 50,000 troops for the whole. He was actually in Eastern Slavonia as an officer of the Ukrainian army, serving in the UN peacekeeping mission, and he sort of compared the territories of Eastern Slavonia and the Donbas, and we came up with a number of at least 50,000 troops, and that's a lot of money.
Olena Snihyr, when I think of what is happening in the east of Ukraine and about some territories which were occupied or not under governmental control in different countries of the world and then came back to the fold of each nation state, I think that this had not yet happened in the areas that became breakaway due to Russian intervention. Transnistria, still not within Moldova. Abkhazia, Southern Ossetia from 2008. So,
even earlier.
Do we have to take into account the situation with those territories and say, no, this is not possible because this is Russia?
You're absolutely right, because when taking into account German experience, we have to, we can take it into account as soon as we have some changes in Russia, similar to what was happening to the Soviet Union during that time. Now, I don't see anything happening similar to Russia. I don't see Mr. Gorbachev second, like if we assume that Putin is kind of Brezhnev, but he's not, definitely not. And I don't, and this is the first and the most important difference, that no progress is possible till Russia controls these territories, and especially when Russia has the direct border with these territories. And but that doesn't mean that we do not have to go on to try. That doesn't mean that we do not have to talk to Russia, as Mr. Veselovsky said, because even because it is important also to show our policy of our view of conflict resolution and our will for peace, so that other leaders compare it with Russian position. And this Normandy summit, tomorrow's Normandy summit, is very important from this point of view, so that to show who is who, to check the clock of all leaders, and to let Mr. Putin demonstrate his firm conflict position here, and and this will help us. First of all, this will help us to consolidate the Western position, the Western support for Ukraine, and to let sanctions go on.
Meanwhile, I think that we need to consolidate our domestic position and our domestic support or non-support in some cases of the situation. In this respect, it is of paramount importance that Ukrainian citizens get a clear view of what is happening, including the Stanytsia Luhanska and other points where the troops have to be withdrawn from the line of contact. And this is what Alexander Borshevsky, the Ukraine's chief representative at the Joint Coordination Committee, had to say to Hromadski correspondent.
I want to remind that according to the framework decision that was signed in 2016, it was agreed that the separation of troops and arms would take place in 3 pilot areas: Stanytsia Luhanska, Zolote, and Petrivske. I would also like to remind that in October 2016, in 2 areas, Zolote and Petrivske, the separation of forces had already happened, but because of the aggravation of the situation at the demarcation line, our units were forced to return to the positions from which they were withdrawn, that is, 1 kilometer back. Regarding the situation in the area of separation number 1, as of today, all of the processes relating to the separation at Stanytsia Luhanska have been completed. You are aware that on November 27th, a pedestrian bridge was opened, which was totally destroyed and has now been restored. Currently, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is taking measures to control ceasefire in the mentioned areas and to continue demining around this area. I would also like to highlight that according to the information from the Joint Forces Operation HQ from June, this year the mentioned area has not had a single case of shelling, so that everyone understands what it provides for and why the separation of forces was carried out in the first place. Regarding the situation in the area of separation number 2, in area number 2, practical steps were initiated with regard to the separation of troops and arms on October 29th, and they were completed by November 1st, after which the roads and roadsides have been demined, as well as other areas that were defined for the removal of explosive objects. Literally yesterday, the OSCE SMM received a verbal note about the completion of separation of troops and arms in the area of separation number 2, Zolote. Now, regarding the area of separation number 3, currently activities there are ongoing. A mirror separation of troops and arms has taken place to the organized positions. Explosives have been removed from roads and roadsides. The road between Bogdanivka and Petrivske has been restored. The fortifications and other military-oriented elements defined by the arrangements are being dismantled. I want to say that as of today, there have unfortunately been occurrences of unlawful military formations and Russian mercenaries, using all possible means to provoke our side, the Ukrainian armed forces, to retaliate.
Sometimes I wonder how can we talk about peace at all with such a military force poised against us and with such a military force that we have to mobilize to repel the aggression. But as they say, we have to start to think about peace even during the war. And my question, and please answer briefly, because I want to show you another quote from a Ukrainian statesperson, is aren't we a bit hasty in trying to talk about peace at this point of time? Vitaliy Deynega.
I think that biggest Ukrainian problem now is that we are talking about peace a lot, but still we have not powerful enough army to defend ourselves and in case of big Russian aggression. And Russia is preparing for big aggression. It's Putin army all around the Ukraine, and it was like in 2013, so everyone says, no, they are not that insane to attack us. And we still think they are not that insane, but they already attacked us. So the problem here is that we have to increase war budget, and we have to be ready for war, not to have it.
Thank you, Vitaliy. Olena Snihyr.
Preparing for war doesn't decline talking about peace. We can do the same things together and talks about peace are very important for for Ukrainian society now and for our international partners. And after we pass this period of talks about peace, and if there are no results, then we can change the rhetoric. Then we can talk about war and peace or war. But we have to pass this period of time. This is very important today.
Andreas Umland.
I also think that peace is still far away. That would actually mean first returning all occupied territories. But what can be now perhaps achieved step by step is a ceasefire. And I think what was actually proposed by Vitaliy, freezing, is perhaps or would already a big success for Ukraine, because I would suspect that once the international business community starts to perceive Ukraine as a country where there is ceasefire, where there's no active fighting, there could be much more foreign direct investment, which again then would increase Ukraine's attractiveness for the people in the Donbas and Crimea.
Thank you, Andri Veselovsky.
Well, you know, every day is dangerous for Ukrainians because somebody can be killed at the line of separation. That is why peace is necessary. Second, peace is necessary because every day Russian propaganda makes local occupied people believe that there is no Ukraine, there is no Ukrainian willingness to help them, etc. And third, we are talking about peace, and we want to have peace. I mean, Ukrainian side, from the position of strength now, because we repeat time and again that that there are Russian forces on our territory, that our economy is ruined by them, that we finally make steps and concrete steps to show that we are a peaceful nation and we want to get rid of this aggression, etc. So I think that sort of psychological moment is very important to talk about peace and to promote peace agenda.
Ms. Snihyr mentioned here the role that the National Institute of Strategic Studies played in preparing the president for these talks. Of course, the civil society voiced their opinion, professional diplomats and experts in international relations also. And before going to Paris for these talks, the president took part in the session of the National Council for Security and Defense of Ukraine, and this is what Oleksiy Danilov, the secretary of this council, had to say about the future talks.
There are talks. I want to say that a lot of time passes between talks and actions. Before we start the process of separation of forces in those areas, the first Deputy Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Colonel General Koval, who is a very experienced person, spent almost a month in the area, studying the situation, what, where and how we can do it, what we can do to prevent the issues we're being asked about, that someone would come in and occupy the area. Trust me, everything we do in the interest of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian state. As of today, it is impossible for our enemies to occupy one or another territory in a swift manner. They can't do what they want there. I can say that we are in favor of separation, but this separation must be thought through. It has to be in our interest. We must be guaranteed that there will be no negative repercussions of this separation for Ukraine. If that can't be provided for, there will be no separation of forces altogether. There are technical issues with regard to separation. We can't carry out separation all across the front line, because there are certain settlements where everything has been destroyed and it is physically impossible. There have to be other arrangements and things, but I'm sure we'll get to the point where we'll be able to implement that too. Our task is peace in our homes, return of our citizens home, as well as ceasefire. The question of Crimea, even if it is currently not on the agenda, we will never give it up.
We have something like 3 minutes before the end of this broadcast, so my question to our experts is absolutely non-scientific and non-politological or whatever. It is a very personal question. What is your personal interest in the success of talks in Paris? 30 seconds each. Andri Veselovsky.
Well, human lives, humans' dignity, restoration of this national spirit has already happened. Now, this Ukrainian spirit should feel that they are supporting right cause and that their future is possible and they will win it.
Thank you very much. Andreas Umland.
Well, I would say the same to finally end this situation where you have every week the news about killed soldiers or civilians on the contact line. This is perhaps now the most urgent task.
Olena Snihyr.
If talks are successful for Ukraine, that will mean for me personally that the confidence that we can win, and that will consolidate the society and that will make us stronger.
Vitaliy Deynega.
I hope that these negotiations will unite Western world to put more pressure on Russia. That's what I'm hoping for. And for me, it's more about, it's very easy to manipulate when talking about human lives. But at the end of the day, if Ukraine loses its sovereignty, we will lose much more people's lives than we are losing currently.
Vitaliy Deynega had a founder of Повернись живим or Come Back Alive charity fund, Andri Veselovsky, Ukrainian diplomat, Andreas Umland, a fellow of the Institute for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation, and Olena Snihyr, expert from the National Institute for Strategic Studies, were guests of this issue of the Sunday show. And of course, this Sunday show is will be followed with what happens on Monday. Follow Hromadske International, wait, and you will get brilliant, I'm sure, and deep reports from Natalia Humaniuk, who is already in Paris. The full story is on our webpage. Also, sign up for our brand new newsletter if you would like to receive Hromadske International weekly headlines, highlights. The sign-up box is on the upper right-hand side of the site. And follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Search Hromadske International. Bye-bye. Till we meet again.